Chapter 1. The flashing lights of the Grand Emerald Gala were usually Cassian's natural habitat. As the nation's golden Omega, he knew exactly how to tilt his chin to catch the strobes, how to let a silk blazer slip just an inch off his shoulder, and how to flash a smile that made every alpha in the room lean in a little closer. But tonight, the air felt different. Static, charged, heavy. "You're doing it again," his manager hissed from behind a champagne flute. "Stop looking for him. You're a star, Cassian. Let him find you." "I'm not looking," Cassian lied, his voice a smooth, melodic purr. "I'm just appreciating the architecture." He wasn't, for the first time in his 24 years. His inner instinct was humming. It was a tugging sensation, like an invisible thread hooked into his ribs, pulling him toward the VIP lounge. And then he saw him. Julian Thorne, a billionaire real estate mogul known for his sharp suits and even sharper tongue. The moment their eyes met across the crowded hall, the thread snapped taut. The room went silent in Cassian's ears. The scent of rain-drenched cedar flooded his senses, drowning out the expensive perfumes of the elite. Fated, the realization should have been a triumph. Instead, as Julian approached, his expression wasn't one of wonder. It was pure, unfiltered disdain. Julian stopped 3 feet away, his alpha presence cold and stifling. He didn't scent the air. He didn't reach out. He simply looked, Cassian up and down from his bleached hair to his designer boots, as if he were looking at a smudge on a pristine window. "So," Julian said, his voice carrying effortlessly in the sudden hush of the ballroom, "the universe has a sense of humor." A frivolous, attention-seeking actor. Cassian's flirtatious smirk faltered. "I prefer acclaimed performer, but if you want to start with pet names, Julian." "Don't," Julian interrupted, his lip curling. "I have a reputation to uphold. I require a partner with substance, not someone who spends their life pretending to be other people for a paycheck. Consider this bond void. A key. I reject any claim you think you have over me." A collective gasp rippled through the gala. The shutters of 100 cameras clicked in a frantic, rhythmic assault. Cassian felt it then. Not a crushing blow, not yet, but a sharp, tiny prick in the center of his chest. A small, dull ache, like a needle being driven into his heart. He blinked, his long lashes sweeping against his cheeks. Most Omegas would have collapsed. Most would have fled in tears. But Cassian lived for the spotlight, and he wasn't about to let it catch him crying. He took a slow sip of his champagne, felt the bubbles sting his throat, and forced a dazzling, razor-sharp smile. "Void. Oh, sweetheart." Cassian chirped, his voice steady enough to fool the microphones. "You say that like I was actually planning to settle down. You're a bit too gray for my taste anyway." Hard on the eyes. He turned on his heel, his heart hammering against that new, strange ache. He could feel the press closing in, the whispers beginning to swell into a roar. Rejected Cassian Thorne. Rejected. As he pushed through the exit, desperate for the cool night air, a large, warm hand clamped around his upper arm, pulling him into the shadows of the stone pillars. Cassian gasped, ready to snap, until he smelled smoke and expensive leather. Orion. His rival, the only alpha in the industry who could match his box office numbers and the only man who had never fallen for his charms. Orion's dark eyes were unreadable, his jaw set in a hard line. "That was a disaster," Orion rumbled, his voice deep enough to vibrate in Cassian's chest. "Glad you enjoyed the show," Cassian breathed, trying to pull away, but Orion's grip was firm. "I didn't, because now the vultures are going to eat you alive. And if you go down, our upcoming film goes down with you." Orion leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing Cassian whole. "You need a distraction, and I need a reason to turn down the senator's daughter." Cassian looked up, his eyes shimmering with a mix of defiance and that lingering, dull pain. "What are you suggesting, Orion?" "A new headline," Orion whispered, his thumb brushing just once against the pulse point on Cassian's wrist. The billionaire didn't reject you. You rejected him because you've been mine all along. Chapter 2. The interior of Orion's Maybach was silent, smelling of expensive leather and the faint, spicy scent of sandalwood that always seemed to cling to him. Outside, the world was a blur of neon lights and chasing paparazzi, their camera flashes reflecting off the tinted windows like heat lightning. Cassian leaned his head against the cool glass, his fingers trembling just slightly as he toyed with the cuff of his silk blazer. That small, persistent ache in his chest, the one Julian had carved there with a single cold word, was still humming. It wasn't a roar, it was a nuisance, like a pebble in a shoe. "You're quiet," Orion rumbled. He was sitting on the opposite side of the bench seat, his long legs crossed, looking every bit the brooding elite alpha the critics love to obsess over. "Just calculating my funeral expenses," Cassian quipped, throwing a sharp, flirtatious glance Orion's way. "Being rejected by a billionaire on a live stream. That's a career killer, darling. I might have to move to the countryside and grow organic tomatoes." Orion didn't smile. He never did. He just watched Cassian with those dark, predatory eyes that seemed to see right through the golden Omega persona. "You're pretending? I'm an actor, Orion. Pretending is what I get paid for." "No," Orion said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating through the leather seats. "You're pretending that your heart isn't splintering? You're pretending that the rejection of a fated mate doesn't feel like being flayed alive." Cassian let out a sharp, airy laugh, leaning closer into Orion's personal space. He could smell the alpha's strength now. It was grounding, heavy, and infinitely more appealing than the sterile rain scent Julian had carried. "Is that what they taught you in method acting class?" "It's a dull throb, at best. Honestly, I'm more offended by his suit than his soul." Orion reached out, his large hand closing over Cassian's wrist. His skin was burning hot, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned cabin. "Then prove it. Use me." Cassian froze. "Excuse me?" "The contract for our upcoming film, Crimson Horizon, has a morality and marketability clause," Orion explained, his thumb tracing the bone of Cassian's wrist in a slow, deliberate circle. "If you're seen as broken or rejected, the studios will pull the funding. They want a lead who is desired, not pitied." Cassian narrowed his eyes. "And what do you get out of this charity?" "My parents are pushing a political marriage with the senator's daughter. An Omega who is difficult to manage," Orion said, his gaze dropping to Cassian's mouth for a split second before returning to his eyes. "If I'm already claimed by my fated mate, they can't force the hand. We tell the press that Julian didn't reject you, that you had already found your true bond with me months ago. And tonight was simply the breaking point where you couldn't hide it anymore." "A fake fated bond," Cassian whispered, the audacity of it making his pulse jump. "That's a dangerous game, Orion. Fated scents are hard to fake. The press will want to see us together. They'll want to see you scenting me. They'll want to see everything. Then we give it to them," Orion replied. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in, his shadow looming over Cassian. "I'm the best actor in the industry, Cassian. And you? You're the most convincing liar I know. We'll make them believe the sun rises and sets on us." Cassian looked at the alpha's hand on his wrist, then up at the sharp, handsome line of Orion's jaw. The ache in his chest felt suddenly distant, muffled by the sheer magnetic pull of the man sitting in front of him. He tilted his head back, exposing the pale, unmarked skin of his neck, a daring, flirtatious challenge. "Fine," Cassian breathed, his voice a low, honeyed drawl. "But I'm expensive, Orion, and I don't do pity well. We're going to be the nation's greatest love story. You'd better be prepared to act like you actually like me." Orion's grip tightened, just for a second. A flash of something raw and possessive crossing his features before the mask returned. "Don't worry, Cassian," Orion whispered, his breath hot against the Omega's ear. I think I can find a way to make it look real. Chapter 3. The backstage area of the Metropolitan Press Club was thick with the scent of ozone and nervous energy. Outside, 300 journalists were packed into a room designed for 200, all of them waiting for the exclusive statement regarding the gala scandal. Cassian stood before a floor-length mirror, smoothing out the lapels of a cream-colored velvet suit. He looked perfect, ethereal, untouched, and utterly composed. But inside, that tiny needle of pain from Julian's rejection gave a sharp, sudden tug. He winced, his hand flying to the center of his chest. Still hurting? Orion was standing in the doorway, looking formidable in a charcoal gray suit that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. He wasn't looking at the cameras, was looking at the way Cassian's fingers dug into his own sternum. "It's just a cramp," Cassian lied, instantly dropping his hand and flashing a bright, practiced smile. "I probably just need a drink, or a vacation, or perhaps a very expensive necklace to distract me." Orion stepped into the room, the door clicking shut behind him. The air seemed to shrink the moment he moved closer. "You're a terrible liar when you're in pain, Cassian. And you're a terrible rival for noticing." Cassian shot back, his eyes dancing with a familiar, flirtatious spark. He stepped into Orion's space, his nose nearly brushing the alpha silk tie. "Are you ready for your close-up, Orion? The world is about to think you've been pining for me in secret for months. Who says I'll be acting?" Orion's voice was a low rumble, vibrating in the small space between them. Before Cassian could process the weight of those words, the stage manager signaled them. 5 seconds. "Gentlemen, the world is watching." As they stepped out onto the stage, the wall of camera flashes was blinding. The noise was a physical weight, shouted questions, the frantic clicking of shutters, the collective intake of breath from a room full of people, seeing the two biggest rivals in the industry standing shoulder to shoulder. Orion didn't hesitate. He reached out, his large hand sliding firmly around Cassian's waist, pulling him flush against his side. The contact was electric. The heat from Orion's palm soaked through the velvet of Cassian's suit, and for a blissful second, the ache in his chest went completely silent. "Thank you for coming," Orion began, his voice calm, authoritative, and utterly convincing. "There has been much speculation about the events of the gala. About a supposed rejection." He looked down at Cassian then, his expression softening into something so tender, so full of simulated devotion, that even Cassian felt a flutter of genuine heat in his stomach. "The truth is," Orion continued, his gaze returning to the press, "Cassian wasn't rejected. He was being protected. Because he is mine. We have been in a private, fated bond for months. And the rejection scene on that live stream was simply the moment Cassian realized he could no longer stand to be associated with anyone but his true mate." The room erupted. Cassian played his part perfectly, leaning his head against Orion's shoulder, looking up at him with wide, shimmering eyes. "Prove it," a reporter shouted from the front row. "If you're fated, let's see the scenting." Cassian felt a momentary flicker of panic. Scenting was private. It was visceral. It was something rivals definitely didn't do. But Orion didn't blink. He turned Cassian toward him, his hands sliding up to cup the Omega's face. His thumbs brushed over Cassian's cheekbones with a possessiveness that felt dangerously real. "Close your eyes," Orion whispered, his breath ghosting over Cassian's lips. Cassian obeyed. He felt Orion tilt his head back, exposing the sensitive skin of his neck, where his scent gland pulsed. And then he felt it, the hot, firm press of Orion's nose against his skin. Orion took a deep, shuddering breath, dragging his scent over Cassian's collarbone. The alphas, musk, charcoal, cedar, and something dark and hungry swamped Cassian's senses. It wasn't just a touch, it was an anchor. In that moment, under the blinding lights and the roar of the crowd, Cassian forgot about the cameras. He forgot about the contract. He forgot about the man who had rejected him. he only felt Orion's heat. And the terrifying realization that this fake bond felt more like home than anything he had ever known. Chapter 4. The penthouse was a cathedral of glass and cold marble, perched so high above the city that the sirens and shouting fans felt like a distant memory. It was Orion's sanctuary, minimalist, pristine, and smelling faintly of expensive scotch and silence, until Cassian moved in. "You're brooding again, Orion. It's bad for your complexion," Cassian called out, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He was currently draped over a white leather sofa that probably cost more than a mid-sized sedan, wearing nothing but one of Orion's oversized black dress shirts. The hem barely hit mid-thigh, leaving his long, pale legs exposed as he kicked them lazily in the air. He was scrolling through his phone, mischievous smirk playing on his lips as he read the latest headlines about their whirlwind romance. Orion emerged from his home gym, a towel draped around his neck. His skin was glistening with a light sheen of sweat, his gray workout shirt clinging to the heavy muscles of his chest and shoulders. He stopped dead when he saw Cassian. "That shirt was dry cleaned this morning," Orion rumbled, his voice dropping into that dangerous, low register. "It was lonely," Cassian countered, not looking up from his screen. "And besides, if a stray paparazzo with a drone flies by, I need to look like a well-marked Omega, don't I? Your scent is all over this. It's functional." Orion walked closer, the heavy thud of his footsteps vibrating through the floor. He stood over the sofa, his shadow stretching across Cassian's body. To any outsider, it looked like a domestic dream. To Orion, it looked like a provocation. "You're overcompensating," Orion said flatly. Cassian finally looked up, his amber eyes shimmering with a challenge. "Am I?" The flirting, the lounging, the constant need to touch my things, Orion listed, his gaze tracking the way the silk fabric slid off Cassian's shoulder. "You're trying to prove to yourself that the rejection didn't hurt. You're using me as a shield against your own feelings." Cassian's smile didn't falter, but the small ache in his chest gave a tiny, sharp throb, a reminder of the bond Julian had discarded. He ignored it, reaching out a playful hand to tug on the end of Orion's towel. "Maybe I just like the view," Alpha Cassian teased, his voice a honeyed drawl. "You're much more interesting to look at than a spreadsheet-loving billionaire. Why would I pine for a rock when I have a mountain?" Orion leaned down, placing a hand on the back of the sofa, effectively pinning Cassian between his arms. The scent of sweat and alpha musk was intoxicating, making Cassian's head swim. "Is that so?" Orion whispered, his face inches from Cassian's. "Because if this is a performance, Cassian, you're hitting all the right marks. But remember, we aren't on set. There are no cuts here." Cassian didn't flinch. Instead, he reached up, his fingers brushing lightly against the pulse point in Orion's neck. He felt the alpha's heart hammer against his fingertips, fast, erratic, and utterly genuine. "Then stop acting like a director," Cassian breathed, his eyes dropping to Orion's mouth, "and start acting like my mate." The tension in the room snapped taut, a physical cord stretched to the breaking point. Orion's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with a hunger that had nothing to do with the script. For a moment, Cassian thought the alpha might actually lean down and bridge the gap. But then, Orion pulled back, his expression smoothing into a mask of iron control. "Go put some pants on, Cassian," Orion said, his voice strained. "We have a chemistry reading with the director in an hour. Try not to be late." As Orion walked away, Cassian let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He looked down at his hand, the one that had touched Orion's neck, and saw it was trembling. The ache in his chest was still there, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a wound. It felt like an invitation. Chapter 5. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, turning the city lights into a blurred mosaic of neon. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly still. Cassian was curled on the oversized velvet sofa, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. The small ache he had been ignoring all week had suddenly flared into a sharp, rhythmic throb. It was the phantom pain of the rejection, a biological protest from an Omega body that felt its fated thread had been frayed. Cassian, Orion's voice was low, cutting through the sound of the storm. He stood by the arched doorway, his silhouette imposing in the dim light. He dropped his keys on the marble console and walked toward the sofa, his brow furrowed. "I'm fine," Cassian wheezed, forcing a playful smirk that didn't reach his watery eyes. "Just a bit of stage fright for tomorrow's shoot. Or maybe the wine was corked." Orion didn't buy it. He sat on the edge of the sofa, the cushion dipping under his weight. He reached out, his large, warm hand pressing firmly against Cassian's forehead. "You're burning up, and your scent, it's sour, distressed." "It's just the bond," Cassian whispered, his bravado finally cracking as a fresh wave of heat rolled through him. "My body hasn't realized Julian is a prick yet. It thinks I'm dying because he said no." Orion's jaw tightened. The mention of the other alpha made his own scent, dark cedar and heavy smoke, thicken in the room. "I told you, you can't just perform your way through a rejection, Cassian. You need an anchor." Orion shifted, sliding behind Cassian on the sofa and pulling the smaller man back against his broad chest. The contact was like an electric shock. Cassian gasped, his head falling back against Orion's shoulder. "What are you doing?" Cassian breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Scenting isn't enough anymore," Orion rumbled, his voice vibrating directly into Cassian's spine. "You need to be overwhelmed." "I'm going to drown out his mark with mine. Call it a rehearsal for the more intimate scenes in the script." Orion's hands, calloused and steady, slid under the hem of Cassian's silk shirt. Roaming over the smooth skin of his stomach, Cassian let out a shaky moan, his eyes fluttering shut. The alpha's touch was possessive, moving with a calculated rhythm that made Cassian's blood turn to molten gold. "Orion," Cassian whimpered, his fingers tangling in the alpha's hair as Orion leaned down to nuzzle the sensitive junction of his neck. "She," Orion commanded, his alpha aura unfurling like a heavy velvet cloak. "Focus on me. Not the pain, not the cameras. Just the friction." Orion pulled Cassian closer, his movements becoming more rhythmic and urgent. The friction of their bodies through the thin layers of their clothes created a static heat that made the room feel like an oven. Orion began to whisper praise into Cassian's ear, low, gravelly words about how beautiful he was, how much better he smelled than any faded match, and how he belonged right here, pinned under a rival's shadow. The ache in Cassian's chest didn't just fade, it was incinerated. As they moved together in the dark, the sounds of the storm were replaced by the rhythmic sound of their breathing and the soft rustle of fabric. When the tension finally snapped, leaving them both breathless and tangled in each other's limbs, Cassian felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He stayed there for a long time, tucked into the hollow of Orion's shoulder. He was supposed to be faking it. He was supposed to be saving his career. But as he felt Orion's heart beating steady against his back, Cassian realized the big bad alpha wasn't just a shield. He was becoming the only thing Cassian wanted to see when the lights went down. Chapter 6. The rehearsal studio was a stark industrial space with high ceilings and a wall of mirrors that reflected every micro-expression. It was usually Cassian's favorite place, the arena where he reigned supreme. But today, the air felt thick, charged with the lingering electricity from the night before. They were sitting on two folding chairs, facing each other with the script for Crimson Horizon open on their laps. The director had stepped out for a phone call, leaving them in a silence that felt heavy enough to bruise. From page 42, Orion rumbled, his voice scraping against the quiet. The confession seen in the rain. Cassian cleared his throat, adjusting his silk scarf to hide the faint, fading reddening on his neck from Orion's anchoring. He flashed a bright, flirtatious grin. "Try to keep up, Orion. I'd hate for the critics to say I carried the whole movie." Orion didn't bite. He just looked at Cassian, his dark eyes tracing the curve of the Omega's jaw. "Just read the lines, Cassian." Cassian took a breath and slipped into character. His voice dropped, losing its playful edge, becoming raw and vulnerable. "I didn't choose this," he read, his eyes locking onto Orion's. "The universe gave me a name and a scent, and told me I was half a person until I found you. But looking at you now, I don't feel like I'm finding a missing piece. I feel like I'm being rewritten." Orion went still. The script in his large hands crinkled slightly. "Then let me be the ink," Orion replied. His voice wasn't the polished, booming tone of a leading man. It was low, gravelly, and directed straight at the man sitting 2 feet away. "If the bond is a lie, then let's build something truer." Orion leaned forward, the distance between them shrinking. The scent of him, that intoxicating mix of cedar and dark musk, began to bloom in the small room. It wasn't the aggressive scent of an alpha claiming territory. It was the inviting, heavy warmth of an alpha inviting his mate in. Cassian felt his breath hitch. He was supposed to deliver the next line, something about forever and fear, but the words died in his throat. He wasn't looking at a co-star. He was looking at the man who had held him through the phantom pains of a rejection, the man whose heartbeat had been the only thing that could steady his own. The flirtatious mask he wore so well didn't just slip, it shattered. "Orion," Cassian whispered, and it wasn't the character's name. Orion reached out, his hand hovering just inches from Cassian's cheek. "You're off book, Cassian." "The script is wrong," Cassian breathed, his eyes searching Orion's for a sign of the rival he was supposed to hate. "It says I'm supposed to be afraid of the bond, but I'm not. I'm not afraid of you at all." Orion's fingers finally made contact, grazing the sensitive skin behind Cassian's ear. A jolt of pure, unadulterated heat shot down Cassian's spine. The ache in his chest, the one tied to Julian, gave a final pathetic little twitch before going completely silent, smothered by the overwhelming presence of the alpha in front of him. "Good," Orion whispered, his thumb brushing over Cassian's lower lip. "'Cause I'm tired of acting like I don't want to tear that contract into pieces." The door handle turned, and the director walked back in, clapping his hands. "All right, let's see that chemistry." From the top, Cassian jumped back, his face flushing a deep, traitorous pink. He scrambled for his script, his heart racing. Orion simply sat back, his expression returning to its usual stoic mask, but his scent remained heavy, possessive, and lingering on Cassian's skin like a promise. Cassian realized then that they were no longer just saving their reputations. They were playing a game where the winner took everything, and for the first time in his life, Cassian didn't want to win. He wanted to be caught. Chapter 7. The star-crossed charity gala was supposed to be the victory lap for their fake relationship. The press had pivoted from calling Cassian the rejected Omega to the Alpha's obsession. Every tabloid featured a photo of Orion's hand possessively anchored to Cassian's waist. Now the public was drinking it up. Cassian stood near the fountain in the center of the ballroom, a glass of champagne in hand and a perfectly practiced, bored expression on his face. He was wearing a suit of shimmering midnight blue, tailored so tightly it was practically a second skin. "You're doing that thing again?" Orion murmured, stepping up behind him. The Alpha's warmth was a physical weight, shielding Cassian from the drafty hall. "What thing?" Cassian asked, tilting his head back to look at him. The shark smile. "You only do that when you're hunting or when you're nervous." Cassian's eyes danced. "Maybe I'm hunting you, Orion. Have you thought of that?" Before Orion could respond, the air in the room shifted. A scent of cold, sharp rain cut through the floral arrangements and expensive colognes. Cassian's grip on his glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. That small, dull ache in his chest, the one he thought Orion had successfully smothered, gave a pathetic, ghostly thrum. Julian Thorne was standing 10 feet away. The billionaire looked different than he had at the first gala. His composed mask was gone, replaced by a frantic, hungry look as his eyes raked over Cassian. He didn't look at Orion. He looked only at the Omega he had publicly discarded. "Cassian," Julian said, his voice straining for its usual authority. "We need to talk." Privately, Cassian felt a flicker of cold fear. But before he could even draw breath to deliver a witty retort, Orion moved. It wasn't a slow step. It was a territorial shift. Orion stepped in front of Cassian, his broad shoulders completely blocking Julian's view. "He doesn't have anything to say to you, Thorn," Orion rumbled. His voice wasn't the smooth tone of an actor anymore. It was the low, guttural warning of an alpha protecting his horde. "This is between fated mates," Julian snapped, stepping closer. His own alpha scent flaring in a desperate attempt to assert dominance. "I made a mistake. The bond, it's pulling at me. I can feel him. I know he feels me too." Julian reached out, trying to brush past Orion to get to Cassian's arm. The sound that came from Orion's throat wasn't human. It was a terrifying, chest-vibrating growl that silenced the entire ballroom. Orion didn't just block him. He seized Julian's wrist in a grip that looked like it could crush bone. "You rejected the bond," Orion hissed, his eyes darkening into a predatory pitch black. "You threw him away in front of the world. He isn't your half anymore. He's mine. He's fated to me." Julian shouted, though he was pale with fear. "Fate was too slow," Orion countered, leaning into Julian's space. His alpha aura unfurling with such suffocating intensity that people nearby began to back away. "I claimed what you were too stupid to keep. If you ever breathe in his direction again, I'll ensure your reputation is as dead as that bond you're clinging to." Orion shoved Julian back with a disdainful flick of his wrist. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned, grabbed Cassian's hand, and marched him toward the exit. Cassian followed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. As they burst into the cool night air of the terrace, he looked at Orion's rigid back. The ache in his chest from Julian was gone, not just muffled, but utterly silenced by the roar of Orion's protection. "Orion, wait," Cassian breathed. Orion spun around, his nostrils flaring, his face still twisted in a mask of protective rage. "Are you all right? Did he touch you? You want to go back to him because of that?" "That pull, Orion—" "Shut up," Cassian interrupted, his voice soft but steady. He stepped forward, closing the gap until his chest pressed against Orion's. He reached up, cupping the alpha's face, forcing those dark, storm-filled eyes to meet his. "I don't want the rain," Cassian whispered, his thumb brushing over Orion's heated skin. "I want the fire. I want you." Chapter 8. The heavy oak door of the penthouse hadn't even fully clicked shut before Orion had Cassian pinned against it. The air in the foyer was thick, charged with the lingering aftershocks of the gala and the raw territorial pheromones still rolling off the alpha in waves. "Do you still feel it?" Orion growled, his voice a low, jagged rasp. His hands were braced on either side of Cassian's head, trapping him in a cage of heat and charcoal-scented shadows. That pull, that ache for him. Cassian looked up, his breath hitching as he took in the sight of Orion. The alpha's tie was loosened, his hair disheveled from the wind, and his eyes were dark with a desperate, possessive hunger. It was the most honest Cassian had ever seen him. Cassian breathed, his own hands coming up to rest on Orion's chest, feeling the frantic, heavy thud of the alpha's heart. "I told you on the terrace. I don't want him." "He looked at you like he owned you," Orion hissed, leaning in until their noses brushed. "He spoke to you like he could just reach out and take back what he threw away." I wanted to tear his throat out. Cassian let out a soft, shaky laugh, his fingers curling into the fabric of Orion's expensive dress shirt. The flirtatious mask he usually wore was nowhere to be found, replaced by a raw, naked wanting. "Then why didn't you? Or better yet, why don't you show me who actually owns this space?" The challenge snapped the last thread of Orion's restraint. He lunged forward, his mouth crashing against Cassian's, in a kiss that was less a greeting and more a reclamation. It was desperate and bruising, tasting of champagne and lightning. Cassian moaned into the kiss, his head falling back against the door as he arched his body into Orion's, seeking the friction he'd been craving all night. Orion's hands moved with a feverish intensity, sliding down to grip Cassian's hips and hoisting him up. Instinctively, Cassian wrapped his legs around Orion's waist, his silk trousers sliding against the rough wool of Orion's suit. "Tell me," Orion commanded against the sensitive skin of Cassian's jaw, his teeth grazing the pulse point that was leaping frantically. "Tell me who you want." "You," Cassian gasped, his head spinning from the sheer sensory overload. "I want the fake bond. I want the rival. I want you, Orion. Please." Orion groaned, a deep, guttural sound of surrender. He carried Cassian toward the sprawling sofa, never breaking the contact. The movement was frantic, the shed of jackets, the fumble of buttons, the frantic need to feel skin against skin. The scene that followed was a blur of high-tension intimacy. Orion was dominant, his movements heavy and rhythmic as he worked to overwrite every trace of the rejection with his own scent. He used his alpha command not to force, but to coax every shiver and gasp out of Cassian, whispering low, possessive praise that made the Omega's soul ache in a completely different way. It was intense, a frantic display of marking and biting, of heavy friction and vocalized need that pushed them both to the edge. Every time Cassian's eyes rolled back, Orion was there, pulling him back, demanding he stay present, demanding he look at the man who is currently holding his world together. When the storm finally broke, leaving them tangled and panting in the low light of the living room, the silence that followed wasn't cold. Cassian lay draped over Orion's chest, his cheek resting against the Alpha's damp skin. He could feel the phantom ache from Julian. It wasn't just gone. It had been incinerated, replaced by a heavy, golden warmth that felt permanent. He looked up at Orion, who was watching him with a look of terrifying vulnerability. "That didn't feel like acting," Cassian whispered. Orion shifted, his hand coming up to stroke Cassian's hair with surprising tenderness. "It wasn't. The contract is just paper, Cassian. This is real." Chapter 9. The morning light through the penthouse windows was soft and unapologetic, hitting the tangled sheets where Cassian lay. He blinked, his lashes fluttering against his cheeks as he slowly drifted back to consciousness. Usually, the first thing he felt upon waking was that nagging, hollow pull in the center of his chest, the ghost of Julian's rejection that had haunted him for weeks. He waited for it. He braced himself for the tiny, sharp needle of not enough. It never came. Cassian sat up slowly, pressing a hand to his sternum. There was no ache, no throb. The phantom thread that had tied him to a man who didn't want him had finally snapped, withered away by the sheer intensity of the night before. In its place was something far heavier and infinitely more golden. It felt like a warm weight settled deep in his marrow, a steady hum that vibrated in time with the heartbeat of the man sleeping beside him. He turned his head, watching Orion. The Alpha looked younger in sleep, his sharp, predatory features softened by the pillow. His arm was still draped possessively across Cassian's lap, even in slumber. "It's gone," Cassian whispered to the empty room. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above Orion's shoulder. He realized with a jolt of terrifying clarity that he wasn't looking for a fix anymore. He wasn't performing for the cameras or trying to spite his ex-mate. He was just in love with his rival, with the man who had bought his fake affection with a contract and then earned his real devotion with a touch. Orion stirred, his dark eyes flickering open. The moment he saw Cassian, his expression shifted from groggy confusion to a deep, grounded focus. He reached up, his hand cupping the back of Cassian's neck, pulling him down for a slow, lingering kiss that tasted of sleep and safety. "You're staring," Orion rumbled, his voice like gravel. "I'm admiring my investment," Cassian teased, though the flirtatious lilt in his voice was thinner than usual, worn down by genuine emotion. The ache is gone, Orion, completely. Orion's hand stilled. He sat up, his gaze searching Cassian's face for any sign of a lie. "You don't feel the rejection anymore?" "No," Cassian breathed, leaning his forehead against Orion's. "I think you crowded it out. There's no room for Julian in here anymore. It's a bit crowded with all your brooding and charcoal-scented ego." Orion let out a huff that might have been a laugh, his thumb tracing the line of Cassian's jaw. "Good, because I don't plan on leaving any space for anyone else." Cassian smiled, a real, dazzling thing that had nothing to do with a red carpet. He felt lighter than he had in years, buoyed by the realization that he didn't need a fated bond to feel whole. He had chosen this. He had chosen the big, bad alpha who had saved him. But as Orion stood to head for the shower, Cassian caught sight of the bedside table. Tucked under Orion's watch was a corner of the fake relationship contract they had signed weeks ago. The paper looked stark and cold against the warmth of the room, a reminder that, on paper, this was still a business arrangement. Cassian felt a sudden, sharp chill. He knew how he felt, but did Orion? Or was the Alpha just the world's greatest actor playing the role of a savior a little too well? "Hey!" Orion called from the bathroom door, sensing the shift in the air. "Breakfast? Don't make me eat alone." "Coming, Alpha," Cassian replied, forcing his grin back into place. He buried the doubt deep, but for the first time since the gala. He felt like he was the one holding a script he didn't want to follow. Chapter 10. The script for Crimson Horizon sat abandoned on the mahogany coffee table. Its edges curled from weeks of intensive rehearsals. The penthouse, once a sanctuary of shared breaths and whispered promises, felt cavernous and cold. Orion stood by the window, his reflection ghostly against the backdrop of the city's gray skyline. In his hand, he held the manila folder that contained their fake relationship contract. He traced the bold ink of Cassian's signature, flamboyant, elegant, and utterly professional. "I'm expensive, Orion, and I don't do pity well." Cassian's words from that first night in the Maybach echoed in his mind, sounding more like a warning than a memory. He watched Cassian across the room. The Omega was draped over an armchair, humming a soft tune as he practiced his lines. He looked radiant. No trace of the rejection remained on his face. He looked like a man who was deeply, hopelessly in love. And that was exactly what terrified Orion. "He's an actor," Orion reminded himself, his grip tightening on the folder until the paper crinkled. "The best in the business," he told me himself, "pretending is what he gets paid for." Every touch, every lingering look, every breathless confession in the dark of the bedroom, was it real or was it the ultimate performance to save a dying reputation? Cassian had been rejected by the universe. It made sense that he would pivot to the next best thing with surgical precision. "Orion, you're brooding so hard I can practically smell the smoke," Cassian teased, looking up with a dazzling, playful smirk. He hopped out of the chair, patted across the room in his bare feet, and tried to slide his arms around Orion's waist. Orion stiffened, stepping back before the contact could anchor him. Cassian's arms fell to his sides, his expression faltering for a split second before the golden Omega mask snapped back into place. "Wow. Tough crowd today. Did the director give you notes, or are you just practicing for the cold alpha scene?" "I was looking at the contract," Orion said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth that had characterized their private moments. Cassian's gaze dropped to the folder. "Oh, that old thing. I thought we'd moved past the fine print." "The fine print is the only thing that's legal." "Cassian," Orion rumbled, his heart feeling like lead in his chest. "We're nearing the end of the promotional cycle. The film wraps in 2 weeks. Once the premiere is over, the fated Bond narrative will have served its purpose." The silence that followed was deafening. Cassian stared at him, his amber eyes searching Orion's face for the man who had held him through the night. He found only the rival, the professional, stoic alpha who treated emotions like line items on a budget. "I see," Cassian whispered, his voice losing its melodic lilt. He straightened his shoulders, his chin tilting up in that defiant red carpet pose. "You're worried I'm getting too into character. That I might actually expect a happily ever after when the cameras stop rolling. I'm saying we shouldn't confuse the script with reality." Orion lied, the words tasting like ash. He had to pull away. If he didn't, the realization that he was actually falling for a lie would destroy him. Cassian let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "Of course. How silly of me. I forgot who I was talking to." The great Orion always hitting his marks. Cassian turned on his heel, grabbing his jacket from the sofa. "Don't worry, Alpha. I know exactly when to exit stage left. I'll see you on set tomorrow. Try to remember your lines. I'd hate for people to think your devotion is slipping." As the front door slammed shut, Orion let out a breath that felt like a sob. He looked down at the contract one last time before tossing it into the fireplace. He watched the flames lick at the signatures, but the coldness in the room didn't lift. He had protected his heart, but as he watched the smoke rise, he realized he had just lost the only thing that made it beat. Chapter 11. The soundstage was a cathedral of artificial rain and high-wattage spotlights. For the climax of Crimson Horizon, the crew had constructed a rain-slicked alleyway that smelled of damp concrete and ozone. It was supposed to be the moment the two leads finally admitted their bond was real, but for Cassian, it felt like a funeral. Orion stood 10 feet away, his expression unreadable under the brim of a sodden trench coat. Since the night at the penthouse, he had been ice, professional, distant, and perfectly polite. He hit every mark, but the warmth in his scent had vanished, replaced by a sterile, stony silence and action. The director shouted. The artificial rain began to pour, soaking through Cassian's thin shirt in seconds. He shivered, but not from the cold. He looked at Orion, and for the first time in his career, he didn't have to reach for a character. The hollow ache in his chest, the one he thought Orion had healed, had returned, but this time, it wasn't Julian's rejection. It was Orion's withdrawal. "You're leaving," Cassian said, his voice cracking perfectly. It was the script, but the tears welling in his eyes were entirely his own. "You got what you wanted. It's the role, the reputation, the safety. And now you're just walking away." Orion stepped closer, his heavy boots splashing in the puddles. "It was a contract, Elias," he said, using the character's name, his voice a low, brutal rumble. "We agreed on the terms." Cassian let out a choked, wet laugh that made the director lean in toward the monitor. He stepped into Orion's space, grabbing the Alpha's damp lapels. "To hell with the terms," Cassian yelled, abandoning the script entirely. The crew went still, but the cameras kept rolling. "You held me. You scented me until I couldn't remember my own name. You made me believe that a lie could be better than the truth." Orion froze, his dark eyes wide as he realized Cassian had gone off script. "I was rejected by the universe," Orion Cassian whispered, his voice trembling as the rain ran down his face like tears. "But that didn't hurt half as much as being looked at like a business transaction by the only person who actually saw me. You think I'm acting? You think this is just a performance to save my skin?" He shoved Orion back, his hands shaking. "I don't care about the movie. I don't care about the press. I'm standing here in the rain, telling you I love a man who thinks I'm a liar. So go ahead, walk away. Hit your mark. But don't you dare tell me this was just a script." The silence on the set was absolute, broken only by the hiss of the rain machines. Cassian stood there, chest heaving, his golden Omega armor completely shattered on the floor. Orion didn't move. He looked at Cassian as if he were seeing him for the very first time, not as a rival, not as a contract partner, but as a man who had given him everything. His jaw worked, his throat bobbing as he struggled to find a line that wasn't written on a page. Cassian Orion breathed, stepping forward, his hand reaching out. "Cut!" the director screamed, leaping up from his chair. God, that was incredible. The raw emotion, the ad-lib. Cassian, you're a genius. The spell broke. Makeup artists swarmed in with towels, and lighting techs began shifting the rigs. Cassian wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his face pale. He didn't look at the director. He didn't look at the crew. He turned and walked straight toward his dressing room, leaving Orion standing alone in the artificial rain, finally realizing that the only person who had been acting all along was himself. Chapter 12. The storm from the film set had followed them home, but inside the penthouse. The rain against the glass was a soft, rhythmic hum rather than a roar. There were no cameras here, no directors, no scripts. Just the low amber glow of the floor lamps and a silence that felt heavy with things left unsaid. Cassian stood by the window, wrapped in a thick robe, staring out at the blurred city lights. He felt hollow, his throat still aching from the raw confession he'd screamed in the artificial rain. The heavy, certain tread of Orion's footsteps approached. Cassian didn't turn around, even when the Alpha sent cedar, charcoal, and a sudden sharp spike of regret surrounded him. "Cassian," Orion whispered. His voice was no longer the controlled rumble of a leading man. It was fractured. "If you're here to give me notes on my performance, Orion, don't," Cassian said, his voice flat. "I'm tired. I just want to sleep." Orion didn't speak. Instead, he reached out, his large hands settling on Cassian's shoulders. He gently turned the Omega around, forcing him to face the truth. Orion's eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. "I wasn't acting," Orion said, the words falling like stones into a still pool. "I was terrified. I thought someone as brilliant as you could never truly want someone as cold as me. I thought you were just the best actor I'd ever met." Cassian's breath hitched. "I'm not that good, Orion. I couldn't fake the way my heart stops when you walk into a room." Orion groaned, a sound of pure, unadulterated surrender. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against Cassian's. "Then stop me, because if we do this now, there is no contract. There is no fake anymore. I'm never letting you go." "Then don't," Cassian breathed, his fingers tangling in the damp silk of Orion's shirt. Orion swept him up, carrying him to the bedroom where the moonlight spilled across the dark sheets like spilled silver. There was no frantic desperation this time, only a slow, reverent tenderness that made Cassian's vision blur. Orion worshipped him. He moved with a deliberate slowness, his touch tracing every curve of Cassian's body as if he were memorizing a masterpiece. The intimacy was quiet, punctuated only by the sound of their synchronized breathing and the soft pew. "I twice are on the move," a loft vocalized needs of two people finally admitting they belong to one another. The narration of their union was a soul-level connection. Orion's alpha aura didn't overwhelm. It embraced, providing a steady, rhythmic heat that felt like a permanent anchor. Every kiss was a vow. Every touch was an apology for the doubts of the past. As they neared the peak of their passion, Orion hovered over him, his eyes locked onto Cassian's with a terrifying intensity. "Look at me." Ori Chapter 13. The night of the Crimson Horizon premiere was a sensory assault. A sea of fans lined the barricades, their screams muffled by the rhythmic, deafening thwip-thwip of 100 professional cameras. Searchlights cut through the sky, painting the clouds in sweeping arcs of white brilliance. Inside the black car, Cassian smoothed the front of his suit, a daring backless number in shimmering silver that caught the light like stardust. He felt the familiar hum of adrenaline, but the frantic, hollow anxiety that usually preceded a red carpet was gone. Beside him, Orion reached out. He didn't just touch Cassian's hand. He interlaced their fingers, his thumb tracing the heavy, golden warmth of the bond that now pulsed steadily at Cassian's pulse point. "You ready for the final act?" Orion rumbled, his voice low and intimate. Cassian turned, a genuine, soft smile playing on his lips. It's not an act anymore, Alpha. That's the scary part. Good, Orion whispered, leaning in to scent the crook of Cassian's neck, a private, possessive gesture that would have sent the press into a cardiac arrest if they could see it. Let them see the truth. The door opened, and the roar of the crowd hit them like a physical wave. Orion stepped out first, tall and imposing in a classic black tuxedo, before turning to offer his hand to Cassian. As Cassian stepped onto the carpet, the flashes were blinding, but he didn't flinch. He walked with his head high, his body naturally gravitating toward Orion's side. They moved as one unit, a synchronized dance of silk and shadow. Halfway down the carpet, a reporter shoved a microphone toward them, her eyes wide with excitement. Orion, Cassian. The rumors are everywhere. Fans are saying the chemistry on set was too real to be scripted. And there's a medical report circulating from your last physical. Is it true? Is the fake bond actually a true biological match? Orion stopped. He didn't look at the reporter. He looked at Cassian. Nature made a mistake once, Orion said, his voice carrying clearly over the shouting crowd. He looked back at the cameras, his expression one of fierce, unshakable pride. It gave Cassian a name that didn't deserve him. So, we decided to write our own fate. The bond is real now, it's because we fought for it, not because a star told us to. The crowd went silent for a heartbeat before erupting into a deafening cheer. Cassian felt the heat of Orion's arm around his waist, the solid, grounding weight of a man who had seen his scars and decided they were beautiful. He caught sight of Julian Thorne standing near the VIP entrance, looking pale and diminished, a ghost of a rejection that no longer had any power. Cassian didn't look away. He didn't hide. Instead, he leaned into Orion, his shimmering silver suit reflecting the brilliance of the spotlights. He looked directly into the main lens of the national broadcast and flashed a dazzling, wicked wink. He had started this journey as a rejected Omega trying to save a reputation. He was ending it as a king who had found his empire in the arms of his rival. As they walked through the theater doors and into the dark, quiet sanctuary of the cinema, Cassian leaned his head against Orion's shoulder. The ache was gone. The script was finished. And for the first time in his life, the real story was just beginning, uncommanded softly. Cassian looked. He saw the man behind the rival. He saw the heart behind the armor. "You are mine," Orion whispered, his voice vibrating deep in Cassian's chest. Not because of a bond, not because of a script. Because I chose you. With a final, decisive movement, Orion leaned down, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin of Cassian's neck. He didn't just scent him. He left a mark, a slow, deep claim that sent a jolt of golden light through Cassian's entire being. The phantom ache of the rejection didn't just disappear. It was replaced by a permanent, humming warmth. As they lay together in the quiet aftermath, their heartbeats echoing one another, Cassian knew the fake relationship was dead. In its place, something far more beautiful had been born in the moonlight.